I've always been able to tell exactly when a company has begun to rot from the inside, and for Solstice Freight Systems, that moment arrived the instant Preston Vale strode into our Tuesday planning session, wearing a blazer that cost more than my first server rack and radiating the particular confidence of a man who has never once had to debug a memory leak at 4 a.m. He clapped his hands together like he was starting a pep rally, surveyed the room full of engineers who had spent a collective 90 years keeping this company's freight routing platform alive, and declared that everything we had built was, in his exact words, outdated plumbing that's holding this company back from the future. I had been sitting quietly in the back corner nursing my third cup of burnt coffee, the same way I had sat through hundreds of meetings over the past 8 years, mostly invisible, except for the one time a year someone needed to know why the shipment tracking engine hadn't crashed during peak holiday volume. My name is Renata Kessler, and the routing core Preston wanted to gut, a system we all called Aurora, was something I had written from scratch during a brutal 6-month stretch in 2019 when Solstice's previous infrastructure collapsed during a supplier crisis that nearly bankrupted the entire company, and Aurora had been quietly saving them millions of dollars every single quarter ever since. When I calmly explained that Aurora handled nearly every ounce of vendor synchronization and warehouse dispatch logic in the building, Preston looked at me the way you'd look at a vending machine that had jammed on your snack, checked his smartwatch, and asked, "And you are?" with a tone that made it painfully clear he already knew the answer and simply didn't care. What Preston did not know, because he had never once bothered to read past the first page of any onboarding document, was that I had never technically been a Solstice employee at all. Back in 2019, when the company was too broke to hire a senior architect outright, my attorney structured a licensing agreement through my own firm, Kessler Systems Group, under which Solstice was granted conditional rights to run Aurora in exchange for a recurring fee and my presence as embedded support staff. Within a week of Preston's arrival, the freeze-out began exactly as these things always do, quietly and with plausible deniability, starting with my name disappearing from the architecture review invites and ending with a smug new head of digital transformation named Corbin, showing up at my desk holding an oat milk latte and asking if I could walk him through the legacy stuff before it got, in his words, sunset. I answered every one of his questions honestly and unhelpfully, explaining that the load balancing logic wasn't magic. It was carefully tuned mathematics running on physical machines that somebody still had to maintain. And then I watched him wander back to Preston's glass office, looking like a man who had just realized his flashlight had no batteries. On the Thursday, my badge access to the staging servers was quietly revoked. Without so much as a courtesy email, I opened my personal laptop at home and checked the account for Kessler Systems Group because I already suspected what I would find. And sure enough, the quarterly licensing payment that funded Aurora's continued legal operation had not been submitted, meaning Solstice had unknowingly triggered the exact clause in our contract that specified a hard 48-hour cure window before automatic suspension. I didn't send a warning email, and I didn't march into Preston's office to explain the mistake he was about to make, because I had spent 8 years being called the legacy person in a tone dripping with condescension. And I decided that this particular lesson was one Preston was simply going to have to learn the expensive way. The termination meeting happened on a Friday afternoon in a glass-walled conference room clearly designed to maximize public humiliation, with a kind HR representative named Marisol sliding severance paperwork across the table, while Preston leaned against the wall looking immensely pleased with himself. And when I calmly slid my own manila folder across the table containing the original signed licensing agreement, his smirk twisted into confusion and then into something close to panic as he skimmed the paragraph explaining that all Aurora source code, architecture, and intellectual property remain the sole property of Kessler Systems Group. I stood up, thanked Marisol for her professionalism, and informed Preston that he had just fired his only on-site support technician, while simultaneously defaulting on payment for the very software running his entire supply chain. And as I walked out through the lobby for the last time, I felt lighter than I had in years. By 8 o'clock the following Monday morning, exactly when the automated procurement bots attempted to process the weekend's backlog of vendor orders, I remotely triggered the license enforcement protocol from my kitchen table while sipping coffee that actually tasted good for once, watching the dashboard cascade from green to a furious blinking red as warehouse scanners across 4 states lost authentication and freight trucks sat frozen at loading docks with blank, digital manifests. Within the hour, my phone was buzzing nonstop with panicked calls from Solstice's general counsel and eventually from CEO Harlan Voss himself. And after a tense 45-minute negotiation that ended with Preston publicly demoted to a windowless role reviewing expense reports, Solstice wired Kessler Systems Group a one-time licensing settlement of $2.8 million to secure permanent rights to the very system they had tried to throw away as garbage. 6 months later, I was sitting in the sunlit headquarters of Vantage Logistics, Solstice's biggest rival, signing a consulting contract to build them something faster, cleverer, and infinitely more resilient than Aurora had ever been. And when Vantage Prime launched that spring, it dismantled Solstice's market share so thoroughly that their stock dropped nearly 40% within a single quarter, while their remaining junior engineers grew too terrified of the old system to touch a single line of code. I still keep a framed copy of that original licensing agreement hanging above my home office monitor as a quiet reminder that the people who actually understand how the machinery works are never as replaceable as arrogant men in expensive blazers like to believe, and that the sweetest kind of justice is always the kind you can invoice for. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.